Donal waiting for a question? Or do you want?
Tony? Donal, you've announced your intention to step down at the EGM. Do you think that will have a positive effect on relations with government?
I think it will. The Minister hasn't hidden his view. There's a distinction drawn all of the time between old guard, new guard. And clearly I'm marked as old guard, and the Minister wants a complete clear out, the extent of which I'm not quite sure. But if I'm old guard, as I've been clearly identified, and I move aside, it can only be helpful.
How much responsibility do you personally bear, though, for what has gone on in the FAI? The figures as have been revealed are shocking.
I was part of a board for many years that has to bear responsibility, that has to bear collective responsibility for not doing better. We've talked about our approved financial statements today. The picture is bleak, I would accept. It's not some wild optimism, but I think it's fixable. I think there are solutions. We've been working very hard at and for solutions. Manage the stadium debt on our prime asset as a proper long-term mortgage, and then address the other elements of debt separate from that. So it's a very, very challenging place. I really regret the association is in this challenging position, because it's all very well calling it the association, but it impacts sport. It impacts my sport in particular, which is football, and it impacts, you know, all the agents in the game, from players right through, parents, referees, clubs, leagues, staff in the FAI. And it is regrettable that this is what they face at the latter end of 2019. But I think in the room today, there were a lot of people saying, okay, you know, we have to get on with it. We have to move forward. This is fixable. There are solutions.
But before you can move forward, you have to take cognizance of what happened. The representative from the auditors today said that they were misled by the board of the FAI, and you were a member of that board.
They
used the word, serious allegation.
Yeah, and look, to be honest with you, I'm not going to really address that issue, because, you know, that may be played out in some other platform or in some other forum at some other stage.
One of the delegates asked that you should apologise to the football family. Will you apologise?
I have before. I've stood in front of staff. I've expressed my regret. I've expressed my culpability. I've done all that before.
And should the association, not just on a one-to-one basis, but in the wider context, apologise to the Irish public?
I just said to you, it's a matter of huge regret that, you know, we have the kind of day that we have here today, and I accept my role in that. I haven't been shy of saying this since last April or May.
Paul, can I ask you, the 18 million that's required, you were clearly upset that Minister Ross breached confidentiality of your meeting by revealing that figure, but it's out there now. You know, how can that be met without government money?
It's probably a partnership approach. Ourselves, our banks, UEFA and government. It's going to be a 3 to 4 way partnership.
Yeah, but when you say partnership, how can you bring that about? I mean, you're not even speaking to government at the moment.
We met government, what was a week to 10 days ago. We met them subsequently, where we had a very constructive workmanlike meeting, and we are scheduling another meeting shortly.
And when you say you met government, that wasn't Minister Ross then?
That was Minister Ross.
It was Minister Ross?
Yes.
So since that meeting in Leinster House?
Yes.
Can you you tell us more about that meeting? Did he apologise for his breach of confidentiality?
It was a very, as I said before, it was, as I said the last day, this one was a very constructive, workmanlike meeting where we engaged in trying to address the issues.
He asked to meet with UEFA. Will you be part of that?
At the moment,
meeting?
that's a bilateral meeting between UEFA and government. But the intention that we would have is that we try and get all the stakeholders together around that date. As I said, ourselves, the banks, government, and UEFA.
It was said that selling your asset, your share of the Aviva Stadium, would be one solution. It was said by delegates today. Do you see that as a likely option?
I think I responded to a question on it where I said that we have a mortgage of about 30 million on it. You mentioned the 18 million financing, so that's 48 million. To sell it, you need 50 odd million at least, just to. So yes, that is an option at that scale.
Okay, Derek.
I guess you mentioned earlier on, Paul, the fact that liquidation is a distinct possibility. How distinct is that possibility of liquidation?
Again, going back, we're engaged in these conversations with our other stakeholders. If those negotiations or conversations were to break down, the solvency process is something that could happen. That could be examinership, it could be even liquidation.
And your discussions with the government about the 18 million euro, I mean, how forthcoming were they in terms of saying that's a possibility? And what did they say needs to be done from an FAI point of view for that to happen?
As I said at that meeting, we didn't get into what the possibilities were. We worked around our plans with them, and we're going to have a further meeting with them.
Talk to me about the what would happen to Irish football. You know, you mentioned liquidation. If that were to come about, what would happen to Irish?
I think liquidation. There's no international match friendlies. There's certainly, at a minimum, uncertainty about the League of Ireland clubs' participation in Europe. I think they're your most severe consequences. All our commercial contracts end. Examinership is slightly different. We get protection from our creditors, but you have to have a viable financial plan for that.
Just coming back to Minister Ross, it was mentioned by one of the members about the tweet that went out on Stephen's Day, the cooking of the goose. Has this become, for him, with an election clearly around the corner, and one of your delegates mentioned it today, an opportunity to kick the FAI for him to gain points? Is that fair? Is that a fair thing to say?
All I want you to know.
Well, I really don't make comment on Minister Ross. I know the particular episode you're referring to did cause a lot of anger and a lot of upset. The motivation for it, or what the relevant politician seeks out of it, I'll leave that up to other people.
But has his approach made it more difficult for the FAI to seek funding from the government?
I come back to that. I come back to the meeting we had, which this time was very productive and workmanlike. And I think the fact that nobody here knew about it would suggest that it was.
Finally, just Brendan Dillon mentioned a letter that he issued to Deloitte back in 2004, 15 years ago, where he raised a number of queries and a number of issues with the FAI in terms of financial matters in specifics, and he mentioned that today. Obviously, we've been told that Deloitte won't comment, and we got pretty much that response from them. But if such a letter was made 15 years ago, is there potential that this all could have been avoided if those issues were, I suppose, taken seriously back then?
I think when I stood up in the 2009 AGM and query figures in the accounts, they could have been taken seriously then.
Well, even back as far as today.
Yeah, well, even go back to 2009 when I stood up and raised those queries when I went on prime time in 2013. So regular, consistent, yes, they could have been dealt with.
Any last questions for the live section of this press conference?